Hey everybody, this is Parker. Today I want to show off something that's been helping me ship a lot more quickly, a lot more confidently, and also give me more trust in my agents that I'm running across my code base. To start, I'm going to run Podman PS. And if you're not familiar, Podman is just something like Docker. It helps you manage containers on your computer. Podman's sort of the open source alternative, and I've been using it and I enjoy it so far. What you'll see when I run Podman PS is a number of containers that are currently running on my computer, or I suppose just one container. It's this Postgres container, and it's just for my local development for my habit hatchery application that I'm building. But if I start this test E2E script, this is just a script in my package.json. It's going to start running tests. You'll see some output on the left, and if I type in Podman PS on the right here, you're going to see there's now two containers. There's one that was started 5 seconds ago, this is a new one, and it's another Postgres container. So on the left, you're going to see a bunch of logs for received request, sent response, and what this is a test script that's going through each of the routes in my backend application, and it is sending real requests to those routes, and the backend route logic is hitting a real database container and, making queries, making inserts, sending responses, and these tests are asserting on the actual HTTP responses that are returned from the app. And now the test script has finished, I can type Podman PS again. You can see now we just have that original Postgres container running on my computer. So the test script managed sort of the lifecycle of the Postgres container. I didn't have to worry too much about spinning up or spinning down Postgres and seeding it with the correct data. So the way I'm accomplishing this sort of integration or end-to-end style test is using a library called Testcontainers. Now, I know a lot of you watch me for like Golang content. I've been building recently in Bun and Effect, but the Testcontainers library supports any number of languages that you see here, including Go, so don't click off if you're not a TypeScript developer. But as it says here, Testcontainers allows for unit tests with real dependencies. And so what I'm doing here is I'm establishing the real Postgres dependency, the real connection to the database. And so I can make sure that the queries that my routes are making are legit and that I'm not sort of mocking out the database and just hoping that the SQL is doing what I expect it to. Now, the way that I'm accomplishing this, if I go here and I inspect the directory, there's a config here for end-to-end tests, btest.config.end-to-end. I should mention that I'm throwing around the word end-to-end. These aren't really end-to-end, they're more integration style tests, but I'm calling other suite of tests integration in this code base. So these are end-to-end tests for me. Anyway, so this vtest config is setting up a couple things, some that are worth pointing out. I'm only testing the things in this test/E2E directory, and I have this global setup script here. Also, file parallelism is turned off so that the tests run in serial. This way, the database connections and sort of the seeded data in the actual database don't impede on one another and make the tests like non-deterministic, for example. So if I go to this global setup script, you're going to see a couple things. First, I have a function that's going to configure Podman for use instead of Docker, which I believe is the default for test containers. Just some very specific code for Podman here. It's not too important, but the key is that you can have compatibility with either Docker or Podman. But really the meat of this is down at the bottom in this setup function here that Vitest runs before all the tests. So it's going to call that configure Podman to get that set up, and then it's going to call this new Postgres SQL container constructor. This comes from Testcontainers. And so you can spin up a container, like a Podman container, using your TypeScript. And usually you would have to do this with like a bash script and run a Podman command. It's not the most portable thing. Testcontainers handles all that for you, including the lifecycle of the container. And this Postgres SQL container object has some information on it, like the connection string. And so you can start accessing that database connection in your code. So again, I'm spinning up a Postgres container using this image tag. Then I get the connection URI and I run the database migrations against that database connection. In my code base, I'm using Kisely. I love Kisely, and it includes a migrator class that's going to run database migrations for you programmatically. And so here, I just establish a new database connection using Kisely, and then I run the database migrations against it. I had this folder full of SQL queries and I should say schema that is going to establish all the tables in the database. Then I just run migrate to latest, and then I release the database connection. So great, now our database is set up with all the appropriate tables and schema, and now I'm going to set some environment variables here before returning a callback that's going to stop the Postgres SQL container after the tests have run. Now the key here, I mean, all of this is fake environment variables. The one that really matters though is this database URL. This is the actual database URL returned from the container. And so we can start using that to access the real container inside of our tests. So what does an actual test look like? Well, if we go to, I'm in that test/e2e directory. If I go to creatures and the create creature spec, you're going to see a Vitest file. It's just like sort of any unit test that you would write using Vitest, but it's following a specific pattern here. So first, before all the tests run, we build the end-to-end database. This function here just establishes, again, a new connection to the Postgres container that's running locally. And then after all the tests, we're just going to destroy that connection and release the resources. Then before each test, we're going to truncate all, which means we're going to remove all of the rows from each table. These are all the tables in the SQL database. We're going to remove all the rows without sort of removing the schema, and so the next suite of tests can go in and insert the rows that they need for the test. Then we're going to seed a session, and so this test is testing real authorization and authentication of the user, making sure that, if the cookie isn't present, that, it rejects with 401. And so it's literally going to insert into the database a user for the test user and a session that is valid in these end-to-end test environment. Now we have access to the cookie and the user ID in our tests along with the database, and we can start making some assertions. So this test here is testing the happy path, creating a creature and persisting it in the database. I follow the Arrange-Act-Assert pattern here. So arrange is setting up the data. As we see here, here's the request body. Acting is sending the actual request. It's worth noting that this app object here is a Hono app. So I just have a function here that creates an app and then returns the app object from Hono. And that way in our end-to-end tests, we can just call app.request to send a real request to the app and run it as if it was in real production environment. This is a post request. It includes the data about the user and the session, and then it also includes the JSON body. Finally, we can do two things. We can assert on the response and the response body, and then also we can assert on the state of the database after the request has run. And so it's pretty straightforward. Set up the data, send off the request, check the response, and check the database state to make sure it's all as you expect. And then we repeat this again, this time checking that an empty body returns a bad request. And then if you don't include the session cookie, you get a 401 unauthenticated response. So if you're previously using Postman or something to like manually test your API routes, I promise there's a better way. It's using test containers like I am here. Programmatically sending requests to your app instead of clicking in Postman or some other HTTP client, and eventually generating a script that runs automated tests across your entire backend. And so you know that if an agent touches something, you can still feel pretty good that it's working as expected. And if you put forward a lot of effort to establish good testing practices, your agent can pattern match and replicate those patterns across all of your routes. And so you can cover your code base and all of your backend routes with these end-to-end tests. Again, all these follow the same pattern of building the database, destroying it after all of the tests are complete, and then truncating and seeding the session, getting the user ID and whatnot, and then Arrange-Act-Assert on the route itself. I promise that once you've paid the upfront cost of setting this all up in your code base, you're going to see huge returns. Your agents are going to be writing these integration tests for all of your routes, and you can feel much more confident about your code. And the cost of setting this up in your code base is greatly simplified by this skill that I found for Testcontainers integration tests. You can see in the code snippets in the skill that a lot of this looks very, very similar to what I have in my code base because I just fed it to my agent and asked it to set up test containers in my backend, and it works very well. I'll include the link for this skill in the description, but again, I really encourage you to start using this in your personal projects. It's really easy to write tests now and feel confident about your code and make sure things aren't breaking. It gives more feedback to your agents so that they can ship more quickly. That's all I had for today, so thank you so much for watching. Let me know if test containers works for you, and I'm looking forward to making more videos in the future. So subscribe and leave a like, and I'll see you again soon. Take care.